Yo, dudes, the Empire's pretty chill. Maybe you could, join it or something.
Lucimus Prime here, so it's time for a special video today where I'm going to be talking about something related to my first ever show that I saw when I was a child. And if you've seen the episode of Old is Better Than New for this show that I'm going to be talking about, you'll know that my first ever show that I saw as a child is the show Thomas and Friends. And today I'm going to be talking about who is my all-time favourite storyteller or narrator of the franchise. Because one thing about the show which has changed over the years is who tells the story. And the show has been through quite a few of them, of course, in its time. And when it comes to my favourite, in my opinion, there's only one narrator who I would regard as the greatest Thomas narrator of all time. And that is the absolute legend, Michael Angelis. So, I'm going to tell you now, of course, why he's my favourite narrator of Thomas. So, now, when it comes to, of course, his time, he narrated the show for 21 years. From 1991 until 2012, and he narrated 14 seasons worth of Thomas content when it comes to the main show. So, when he first began narrating in 1991 with the third series, he had a lot to live up to, because he was the narrator taking over from Ringo Starr, a Beatle. So, he had a lot to live up to as a narrator, but did he let that get to him? No, he did not. Because when he narrated his first season as narrator, he gave an absolutely phenomenal performance as the narrator of the third series. When you hear his voice, you can tell he's having a great time telling the story. And not to mention, he puts so much passion into storytelling in his first season. And he gives the characters all different kinds of voices and personalities, which, in my opinion, he nails to perfection. And nobody, in my opinion, can do that better than him. He did so well in his first time as narrator. He might not have been well known at the time compared to Ringo Starr, but he didn't let it get to him. He narrated the entire thing and did a phenomenal job. He'd even come back for more, because he even returned for a fourth series, and once again he did a really amazing job telling the story. And you can tell he really enjoys it, and I think his voice is just what you need when you're telling a story, whether it be like a bedtime story or reading a book or anything like that, or any regular story. In my opinion, he's got just the perfect voice you need for it. Then he, of course, came out with Series 5, and as you guys may know from my video on Old is Better Than New for Thomas, that is my favourite Thomas series of all time. Series 5 is my first ever Thomas show that I saw when I was a child, and his voice was just iconic in my opinion. In my opinion, that season was Thomas at its peak. In my opinion, the best of the best. And the best for me is a classic series of Thomas from Series 1 to 7. And Angelis absolutely nailed it in the 5th series, and he gave great narration throughout. And he knew what to do as well when it comes to the tones. He knew how to do happy lines, sad lines, energetic lines, and also scary lines too as well. He knew just how to do it at the right time. And in my opinion, he did it absolutely perfectly. When it comes to his time being a narrator, I think it's also fair to say that he's also been through Thomas through thick and thin. Because he's seen the show go from everything being good times, but sadly also bad times, and everything in between that. But despite that, he was there for it. For example, when the first ever Thomas film, Thomas Magic Railroad, came out in 2000, he was hired originally to be the voice of James and Percy in the film. But sadly, Tess Audiences called his voice too old, and sadly he got kicked off the film and replaced. And that, in my opinion, was a massive mistake, because I've heard his voice in, the test recordings for a film, and compared to the actual voices that we got for the film, in my opinion, he was far better. And I think he should have stayed as a voice of James and Percy for the film, because he was much better in my opinion. I don't know what Tess Audiences were thinking calling him too old, especially because he's had experience of being a narrator already for 3 seasons, so that was ridiculous in my opinion. But, despite being kicked off the film, did he leave the role of narrator for the show? No, because in 2002, he came out with Series 6. And even though he'd been kicked off Thomas's first ever film, he still did a brilliant job telling the story. In Series 6 in particular, you can tell he's having a great time. He sounds really energetic and happy all the time. You can tell he's loving it. Then he came out Series 7, and once again, he really nailed it. I think Series 7, in my opinion, is slightly better than Series 6, in my opinion. That's just my opinion, though. And even in that, he was still great and maintained the amazing voice he had for the entire time narrating Thomas in that series. And some might say he only kept going as narrator just so he could get paid, but that's not true, because I've already mentioned that you can tell he's having a great time telling the story because he sounds happy, and you can tell he's really enjoying it from that. But also, if you look at Michael Angelis' filmography in the time he was Thomas' storyteller from 1991 to 2012, you can see he's been in lots of other things at the same time. Lots. So it's quite clear that Thomas was not his main source of money at all. He always kept going because he loved telling a story, and you can tell when you're watching a series when you hear his voice. When it comes to being there for the bad things Thomas went through, another thing that also happened after Series 7 is that Hit Entertainment, of course, purchased Thomas, and as a result, they turned it into a babyish show from Series 8 onward, which in my opinion was a dumb move. Because in my opinion, the classic series was already perfect as it was. So they didn't need to change at all, in my opinion. Because even when I was 3 years old, I understood what we were going for in the classic series perfectly. Even as a 3-year-old, I understood it perfectly, and I still do to this day. But from Series 8 onward, in my opinion, they really changed it, and not for the better, sadly. But despite this change, did Michael Angelis leave? No, he did not. He still kept going, and I still kept watching the show, because he was an icon of my childhood, and I wanted to keep hearing his voice. So I stayed on watching Thomas to hear his voice, and even though he had a lot of different directions to work with than before, and sadly not good direction, unfortunately, because of the babyish tone of the franchise now, he still did a brilliant job telling the story, and still gave all he got to the franchise. Then unfortunately, of course, with the release of a film of great discovery, he was unfortunately replaced by more well-known actor being, of course, Pierce Brosnan. Then after Pierce Brosnan was let go because the producers thought his voice wasn't good enough for a full-on series, did Michael Angelis return after they asked for him back? Yes, he did. He came back for the UK dub to narrate Series 12. And while Series 12 is my least versatile model series of Thomas, I still think he did a great job, and he still made it watchable for me because, as always, he did a great job telling the story, and you can tell he's on a good time when you hear his voice. And I, for record, also don't blame the voice for the characters in that series being off on him at all. It's because he had to, of course, sync his voice to the mouth movements of the engines and the other characters, because Pierce Brosnan had already recorded Series 12 before he was let go, and for some reason they left the animations as they were to his voice, because they were matching his voice. They didn't change it for Michael Angelis or Michael Brandon's in the American dubs narrations respectively, they kept it as they were. So Angelis had to unfortunately match his voice to the mouth movement. And I can imagine it was hard for him to do, because I've done it myself when redubbing certain things. It's not easy, so I can see why he was struggling a bit. But I still don't blame him for that. It wasn't his fault. Despite, of course, the rush production of that series, he still did a great job what he was given, in my opinion. And then, after that, of course, Thomas then went on to becoming entirely CGI. And that was when, in my opinion, the show was getting much more worse, because I really hated the CGI series of Thomas. And it became very repetitive, and it also masked lots of characters. But did Michael Angelis leave as narrator? No, he did not. He stayed until he was let go after Series 16. I'm not going to say he left the series per se, because I think he would have stayed on for as long as possible because how much he loved doing it. You can tell. And when the time called for energy in the CGI series, he really showed it. For example, in the film Hero of the Rails, which I've seen, he's full of energy when telling the story. He makes the scenes so intense, in my opinion, and it really captivates the story so well, in my opinion. And he kept doing that in other films like of course, Misty Island Rescue and David Diesel's, and then, of course, his final film, Blue Mountain Mystery. And in the show, he still made it watchable, because I still kept watching the series. Even though I hated the new direction we went in, he still made it watchable for me with his great voice, because he was full of energy. You can tell he was having fun telling the story. Even though he wasn't playing a character anymore, just telling a story, he still did a brilliant job, in my opinion. And when he left the series in Series 6, after Series 16, I was beyond heartbroken, because one morning, I came downstairs to watch TV before school. Thomas was on TV, I went on to it, and when I heard it was not him telling the story, I immediately switched off the episode because I was heartbroken. Because by not telling the story anymore, I felt like a part of me was gone when it comes to Thomas, and that's why I stopped watching the show. And I'm actually glad that I did that now, because nowadays, when it comes to Thomas, in my opinion, it's changed much more worse, to a point of the franchise now being dead, sadly, which really sucks. And Michael Angelis gave all he got, and with lots of great voice for characters, ranging from Thomas himself to also James, the Fat Controller, Percy, Gordon, and also Donald and Douglas, Emily, Diesel, among many others. Like, he did such a brilliant job telling the story with all different voices of the characters. Did a really amazing job throughout his time as narrator. And the fact that we unfortunately lost him in May 2020, 4 years ago now, it really hurt me so much, because when I heard about it on the news, I was just, devastated, because an icon of my childhood was gone. It felt like a part of me had gone too when Michael Angelis passed away. Like, it was devastating to me beyond so many levels. I just couldn't believe it. And I'll always cherish, his time as narrator, because he still did an absolutely phenomenal job in his time. And to this day, I still rewatch his episodes because he still does a great job. His voice was a source of comfort for children and also everyone else who watched Thomas. And it was a voice of security. And you'd feel in good comfort when watching Thomas because of his voice. Like, he really cared for the audience. And he didn't just tell a story for the show. He also did other things, for example, audiobooks, and also as well adverts, and many other things to even video games too. He even was attending Premier Hero the Rails. So, and he even said that the franchise has a charm of its own, and he couldn't have been any more right when he said about a Hero Rails premiere. I'll always miss Michael Angelis to this day, always will. To this day, I still rewatch Thomas, and I'm proud to admit that. No matter what happens to the franchise, I'll always keep watching my classic series, because that, in my opinion, was where Thomas was at its peak, especially my favourite series, Series 5. And while Michael Angelis may not have been the most well-known narrator of Thomas, I can tell you guys now that he will always be my narrator of Thomas and all his friends.